2.8 billion of that has been in follow-on offerings. So what that means is that even in times of the most pessimistic outlook from investors and companies and economists, the AIM investors are stuck with their investments where their investments have performed, and hence you're seeing the follow-on offerings. And the other thing here, obviously, to note is that the markets have always remained open for the right company which has the right story. So execution is really critical. Slide number 4, AIM is truly international market. Again, nearly 40% of all AIM companies that Richard mentioned earlier as well are from overseas. And again, the main takeaway here is, if you look at this trend, it still shows sort of 60-40, but if you think about it, the international companies only started coming to AIM back in, like I said, about 2001, around the dot-com bubble. So it's only been over the last 7 or 8 years, and this trend is only increasing. And if you also sort of segment the data, you'll see that the market cap of the international companies far outweighs the market cap of the UK companies, i.e. larger companies are coming from overseas than the ones you see from UK. Number 5, the AIM supports a diverse range of core sectors. The AIM, I think traditionally there's been considerable weightage to natural resources, oil and gas sectors, but recent trends in global markets and dominance of emerging markets has resulted in a shift of balance towards core sectors. And I think what we're seeing, and Raymond will speak to this a little bit later, is from an investor perspective, there's a general preference for consumer-driven growth stories where growth is systemic to sort of GDP growth. It's not sector-focused, and with that you're seeing companies in the consumer area. Telecoms has always been there, but a lot of financial companies, a lot of healthcare companies, consumer good companies are starting coming to market. And frankly, even some of the core sectors such as infrastructure are viewed by investors as consumer plays. So if you look at power, which is done really well, Indian Power on the AIM, and we'll speak to this a little bit later in our presentation as well. Indian power companies have commanded quite a premium over what Indian power companies command in evaluations on the Indian bourses, and a piece of that is a key element of that is basically because of the underlying growth story and the underlying macro demand-supply imbalances. The last slide I'll pause on is the fact that the AIM provides access to leading institutional investors. This is a question we get a lot as we meet with you across the country, is who are the key investors. And as you'll see from the list on the left, you have sort of the most active institutions by value of investments, and on the right you have the most active institutions from the number of investments. And each one of these top 10 on both sides is sort of the creme de la creme of the institutional investor base globally. The other key point here to note is that there's really no difference in the investor base that you will encounter or go and present to or hope to have invest in your company, whether you invest on the LSE main board, standard list, or on the AIM. It's the same investor pool. The other key thing to touch upon here is that the AIM has really been constructed, as Richard was saying earlier, as providing you access to large institutional investors. It's less retail focused, and that's by design, because again it was constructed for growth companies. And I think that also leads to the heart of the question that we often get asked about the liquidity concerns that people have about the AIM. And I think there's a time and place for liquidity, because liquidity implies retail investors. As Indian markets know well, retail investors tend to be more sentiment-driven, less fundamental-driven. And I think when you're in the growth phase, as a management team, you want to focus more on growing the company and having access to dependable capital, loyal capital, and people who can think strategically and long-term, as opposed to not. I'll hand over to my colleague Raymond to sort of walk you through some other considerations, including coming at this from a investor perspective.